Anybody out here?
I do.
You want to come up to the podium?
As informal, my mic's not, as informal as this is, since it is, we do tape it, and so people that are watching after the fact will be able to hear your comments, so thank you.
Jill Langer, I live on Castle Peak, and at the corner of Castle Peak and Huron Peak, there's actually two rentals that are opposite each other, or kitty corner from each other, that one of the homes has approximately anywhere from 5 to 7, sometimes 8 cars. They park 2 in the garage and all the rest go on the street. They park opposite each other, and I lived on the other side of Colton when we first moved here, and the streets were nice and wide, so you could pass, you could park cars in the road, and it didn't impede the traffic. It's right now, it's down this way. It's right here. So there's 2 cars in the garage here, and there's anywhere from 2 over here and 3 over here, and this is a stop sign right here, so it makes it very difficult to get, I mean, you have to stop. You can't pass 2 cars there, so either somebody has to stop in this intersection to let the car coming through pass, or the other people, and it's kind of a little bit of a curve here. So it's hard to see if you're in a shorter car, or if a shorter car is coming toward you, because they have big Land Rovers. And I don't know if there's, how many cars can one family have per household? It is a rental, I do know that. This house also used to be a rental, which they parked all along here. That's when we put the signs that backed up
Right.
because they used to park right to the corner.
So we put the signs right here, but we don't have.
There's a sign here, there's a sign here, so you can't park forward of those. You know, it's maybe 20 feet, 10, I don't know, 15 feet, I don't know how much it is. So they park right to the sign, but they park opposite each other on the road. So basically one car can come through kind of at an intersection, and it gets a little dicey. Castle Peak is a very busy street. So it's just, I don't know what can be done if we make one side of the street on this corner, because it is such a thoroughfare, like this side no parking and this side no parking. But when you put 2 cars on either side parked constantly, I mean, the cars are there all the time. Laura
Jill,
knows.
did you mention that some of them were work vehicles?
Some of them are work vehicles.
I know there is an ordinance against cars with signage, if I'm not mistaken.
They sell
Okay.
exercise equipment or something, but
Okay.
it's gotten worse. It's getting, you know, that now I think in the last week or 2, they've added 2 more cars to that. So we're talking 7 cars for one house that lives on a corner, and they only park 2 in the garage, none in the driveway. So all the rest are on Castle Peak. So it makes it a little difficult to drive. It's, you know, I pass it every day, you know, 20 times a day, you know, not 20 times, 20 times a week I probably pass through there, and I have to stop to let somebody through, and especially during school time, when school's either going in or letting out at the end of the day. It's a traffic jam on Castle Peak for sure. So anyways, I don't know what can be done, but I don't know if we can make this, because it is such a thoroughfare, this side of the road, no parking, opposite, so that we can get traffic flowing a little bit better through there.
So that goes back to that idea I proposed a couple of years ago. Could we do
Right.
alternate side parking, you know, north side one day, south side another day? But I think the problem is there isn't really an easy way to count how many cars are to one household. And even if there were, I don't know that we could enact something retroactively saying now you can only have a certain number of cars.
But could we do some signage but I feel bad for these people, because they really don't have anywhere to park on this.
Yeah.
They can't park here because that's a stop sign.
Well, I think the challenge is, I mean, we did block off close to the intersection.
Right.
But now it sounds like we could just kind of keep pushing the problem further up the street. So we're going to cause that traffic jam somewhere, as long
Yeah, it
as.
seems like we have plenty of room here and here for parking. I mean, we could move those no parking signs farther from the stop sign and still provide
Well, the
some.
parking was really a courtesy because the code says you can't park 15, 20 feet or some
To the
appropriate
intersection.
distance from.
Right.
So the sign was a courtesy in case somebody hadn't studied the code.
Okay.
So I don't think we could really move up the sign at this point. I will say just a couple comments. If you haven't talked to the neighbors, that's always an option, knock on the door with a polite, boy, those are a lot of vehicles, we're having a tough time, or politely, right? Always an option.
Always an option. I don't know if I'm willing to do that, though, but.
And then, but if they are, Alex, I do think we could ask somebody to do a drive-by, because if they are work vehicles and somebody's using this as their place of business, which
Right.
a lot of us work from home these days, but.
I think
if
he
they're delivery
travels
vehicles-
around, but the car always it's always there at nighttime. So it's there, and there's one that never moves. It probably hasn't moved in 2 months.
And if that's.
They have the correct, and I looked at it tonight when I drove by, the correct stickers on it, that they're good till 12 of 2019, but it doesn't move. It's just kind of a dead vehicle, and it looks kind of trashy when you come through there. It's, just tons of vehicles, and I don't know. It's just annoying that I have to stop. I've had to back up here because I've gotten too far and they can't back up because there's somebody behind them. And I've had to back up so that they can come through and which, if I had somebody behind me, we'd really have a traffic jam. But, this is why they skinnied up these streets on the south side of Colton, because they wanted to slow traffic down. But now you get people parking on both sides. It doesn't allow for 2 cars to pass with
Right.
2 cars parked opposite each
Right.
other.
Okay.
So, I don't know what.
We'll give our code enforcement people and see if there's any
Yeah.
code issues that and they can go out and leave letters or try to talk to these people to encourage them to be aware of the problem and try to park somewhere else.
Good. Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, next item, we wanted to have a discussion of our neighborhood traffic calming program update. And I provided in your packet, first, the existing program that we have, existing guidelines that we have. And then Carlos has developed a checklist with some updates of the existing policy. So we got the checklist, and there's some highlights for areas that we wanted to discuss. And then we have the actual guidelines that were adopted, I think, in 2006. So they've been around for quite a long while. Carlos, you want to take over?
Good evening. So, Alex, can you pull up that on the screen so those in the audience can see if it's hiding in there? So, thanks for having me back. What I've been working on with Alex since our last meeting was reviewing these 2 pieces of information, the Word documents you have in front of you. And I also went to meeting notes. I reviewed not only notes, but the video from the Weldona conversations. And then I went onto the Facebook page and reviewed conversations that have occurred over the last couple of years, and just kind of back and forth conversations among the community about this topic. And what I realized is that there's not a one-stop place for people to go to understand this process. So what I drafted here is a 5-step process that pivots from all the information you have. There's mostly what you'll see in here, you've already adopted and you have in your code. There are some new ideas that we have based on input that I think you've received in the past that we've kind of tried to solidify in here. So what I wanted to do is run you through this at a high level and then let you get into the weeds on it. But the idea on a very, very high level is that if someone asked you, hey, what's the process for neighborhood traffic calming into Town of Superior? You could forward them this as a checklist. You could reference this as elected officials. People in the community could understand where they are, where they could go with their street, their neighborhood relative to this. So I'll walk you through this. That's the high level warm up. So what I did is I took everything and created 5 steps. So the first step is determine if the neighborhood traffic calming program type is applicable. And so there's 2 unknowns in there. I'll get to those in a minute. But step 1 is determine what kind of project it's going to be. Then after you determine the project, the second step is to collect data and determine if a project is eligible. Okay, and most of the things we're going to talk about in there are already in your code. I've just put them all in one stop, in one place. And I've also tried to solidify with more detail what those could be. So after you would take step 2, which would be data collection and eligibility, then it would come back to you, the TSC, to determine whether the project is eligible to move ahead. So what's been going on in the past is someone brings up a topic, it's an important topic, but there's a lack of kind of data and information and a lot of data. And so what I'm trying to do here is actually have the data for you the evening at these meetings when you're ready to make a decision about whether the project should move ahead, okay? So that you can make a data-informed decision, as the community should be able to do as well. So that's step 3, we'll talk about that. And then after you would determine a project would be eligible, it would go to step 4, which would be community outreach. So before you're even determining whether something should have a new sign, whether it should have a new tool, whether it should be, how much is it gonna cost, you go into this community outreach process. And that's where you use all the great process and outreach ideas that are already in your current program. After you do that process, step 4, you come back as a committee and you discuss what you've learned, not only with the community outreach, but new information you may have received as part of data collection efforts. And then you get to step 5, which is the project approval. In there, you either approve the project or you don't, right? So just because you get to step 5 doesn't mean the project becomes a mid-block crossing or a speed hump. At that meeting, you have a feedback loop about whether it's approved or not, right? So that's the 5-step process that's largely in what you have right now. What I've done is organized it in a way that can help people digest it. So what are the details of this? Well, step 1, if you go back to step 1, determine the neighborhood traffic calming type. In your code and in the documentation right now, you have reactive programs and proactive programs. So that first box is reactive programs. And these are where the neighborhoods come to you and say, hey, I've collected 5 signatures and there are 5 different households on my street and we want to do something about this, right? You could begin to get even more detailed to say those 5 residents can't live next to each other. They have to live at opposite ends of the block. They have to live within a boundary, right? I can show you all different types of programs that have, the one from Berkeley is quite interesting if you could imagine what their program is like. And so you can't be related, you can't be in co-housing, it's all these really interesting requirements. You don't go that far, which in my opinion, I think is good for the process, but you require 5 signatures. That's not new, okay? The box underneath, the proactive parking, this is new. This is where staff, and potentially with my help, says here are other projects that are proactive, that are not in a neighborhood, that can be part of traffic calming, right? So like, what about arterials and collectors? When these local trails hit these, not hit, sorry, it's a bad word, when these local trails interface, right? What about safe routes to school? What about when you're doing intersection improvements at signalized intersections around town? What about when there's missing sidewalks and setbacks? What about trail crossings? So those are more proactive staff-generated types, okay? So those are that's kind of step 1.
But I mean, those different types, I mean, I'm not sure we'll have the community outreach on all of the pedestrian crossings or things like that. I mean, that's more of a safety issue. So I think the staff and TSC will have to determine, do we need an outreach process on some of those things?
Alex, thanks for that clarification. That's been my biggest concern here because it looked like we're putting safety to a vote where, you know, if we don't get to 65%, the TSC doesn't have to view it. I don't want safety to ever be put to a public vote because, you know, for example, there's parts of this town that don't have sidewalks where I think ADA compliance may require that, but that part of the town may not want it. So, you know, at what point do we just overrule the locality for safety?
So like the Coal Creek crossing at Akron, for example.
Yep.
That's something you guys brought up.
Yeah.
There's no one that lives right there. So
Perfect.
I mean, that lives right adjacent to it. I mean, they all back up.
Yeah.
And that's something that's more of a community-wide, and it's on a collector.
Right.
So that's something that you brought to us or someone's brought to our attention. So we bring that to you, we collect the data, and then you would determine, what type of outreach do we need any at that point.
And that actually brings up another question I had around the reactive programs. Is it possible for residents to recommend a street they don't live on? So not necessarily me saying, oh, I think Kevin Street needs one, but more when we're talking about those areas where there aren't homes, could I recommend, hey, I think Indiana needs a program?
The current program allows you to do that. It does not say you have to live along it in order to initially start the request, right?
Okay.
So 5 signatures, 5 residents from 5 different households on a minor collector or local street, right? So it doesn't go as explicit to say that you can't do that today.
I think that, I would say, people can bring that to staff, and then we bring that to you. It's not going to affect the people that, it's not going to be like a speed hump in front of somebody's driveway.
Yeah.
But I think it could require a community outreach process, like if we did traffic calming on Coal Creek Drive.
Well, and I'm thinking specifically just around this, I love this checklist. I think it's fantastic. I think we'll be able to put it out to a lot of residents, but I would like to update that first box to just clarify that it's 5 signatures of residents from 5 different households and remove the specificity of on a minor collector or local street.
Great.
Well,
This is the current,
It's in your code.
based on-
this is what's on the
Based
current
on-
code.
This is,
Right. No,
so we
understood.
got to update this first then.
Okay.
I think that's the issue.
Well, I mean, I
and
think
by
what
the way,
we're
it's
trying
not,
to do is take what we have today, which is challenging to understand, to put it on a single page that you can hand out to a resident. So
Yep.
separate from a process of, should we update the traffic calming initiative and what's in the code? So I think those are 2
Agree.
different issues.
Yes.
By the way, it's not-
And so
it's
I guess
not a-
my suggestion would be I would like to update the code such that residents can recommend a traffic calming program for any street, not just those 2.
and by the way, it's not in the code. It was adopted as guidelines to give, here's staff direction, here's how we want to implement a traffic calming program. So it's guidelines that were adopted by resolution of the board.
So I'll keep a list of these, and then at the end of this conversation, we can revisit which ones we may
Great.
want to, okay?
Perfect, thanks.
All right, so then that's step 1. I'm going to keep going in the interest of time. I would love to spend 3 hours on this. I'm sure you would too, but we got a lot of things to cover tonight. So step 2 is something that we used from existing language in the guidelines, and we added some new ones. So the first one, well, I'll start at a high level because that's always helpful. So what are we going to collect? Speed data, you can see these in bold, right? Speed data, traffic data, which is traffic volume data, crash data. We're going to do a stop sign warrant analysis. Kevin will talk about that and what that means in a minute. And then we're going to map the projects so we understand everything that's going on. And then I would like to introduce this notion of collecting data about neighborhood perceptions, because I think that's missing right now from the kind of current data information, quantifying that in an objective way. So those are the what we would propose to collect in the step 2. So the first one's speed data. So what we want to do is collect data for a week, which is 5 days worth of data. And then what we would do is we'd map the data, graph it, and look for what we call 85th percentile speed in that data set. And then an 85th percentile speed, right now, based on your current guidelines, your street's eligible if the 85th percentile speed is 5 miles per hour over the posted limit. So if the posted limit is 25 and the 85th percentile speed's 28, that alone won't get you in. It won't get you to step 3, right? So, and as an example of this, Alex, can I borrow this? I wanted to show you, there was a question and an email, which were great, actually, about speed data and how many days is enough. And I wanted to show you this. Okay, is there a way to zoom into this a little bit? Let me see. There, that one, right?
Up there.
Plus, right? Okay, cool. All right, so this is an example project I've been working on for Denver for a couple years, and it's the y-axis. You're going to tell I have a 6th grader at home. The y-axis is a y because it goes up and down, so it's the vertical axis. The y-axis is miles per hour. The x-axis is time of day. Here's midnight. everyone's sleeping and speeding through the neighborhoods. And then everybody wakes up and gets some coffee and gets going. And then here's noon, and then here's the peak commute hour when the road's congested and speeds get lower because everyone's driving slower because there's more congestion. And then everybody's home watching American Idol, and then everyone's out cranking up the speeds again, right? And so why I'm showing you this is I think we should be showing the data hourly, and when we collect speed data, and we should be showing it for multiple days. So in this case here, this was in a few years ago, May 2005. We did a couple days in April and a couple days in May. And so this was days of the week. And then we did another one in November 2016. And then I think here's another one in May 2017. So what I'm telling you there is we've studied, I believe this data set has like 50,000 data points in it. And there's very little variation in speed data in this context. So although there's different times of year when school's out of session or in session, snow, no snow, that happens. But I can tell you after doing this for, this has been 4 years worth of data in multiple sets, there's not a lot of variation there. So what I'm proposing as part of this effort, let me just get back to the right graphic here. Oh, sorry, let me get the checklist so those at home can see this. So what we're suggesting is 5 days worth of data. Boulder, we worked with Boulder over the last year on some new data collection standards, and Boulder has arrived at 3 days. So if you did 5, you would be doing 2 more days than Boulder does for their neighborhood traffic calming program. And so that's what we want to do with speed data. We also want to do the same thing with traffic data. So we'll collect the data over 1 week period for 5 days. Ideally, you collect it during the months Boulder Valley School District's in session. Ideally, you don't collect it when there's like a big snowstorm going on, right? And you collect it on a representative day on when school's in session. Speed data is great because you get a lot of data points when you do it for 5 days. When you do traffic data, you summarize it daily, right? So you get 5 data points, right? When you do traffic volume data, when you do speed data, you can look at it all together. So you end up getting a lot of points, right? We're going to work with Alex and PD to just summarize the crash reports. And so we're going to summarize what type of crashes happened. We're actually going to read the reports because that's where you get all the information of what was going on to understand if there's patterns or trends. I recommended, this is not in the code, so this is something new. I recommended that we at least do the MUTCD manual on uniform traffic control devices, this big, great book that governs all signs in the United States, that we actually at least do what they recommend as a study for whether a stop sign is warranted or not. You can choose not to follow that, but as professional engineers and planners, we would like you to at least see that information so that stop signs that get installed at least have some legal basis and background, or if you want to make a decision elsewise, that's cool, but we want to at least run those. They're very challenging warrants, Kevin. I know you've mentioned those in the past, and they're not the most ideal warrant, but it's the best that we have, and we'd like to just at least have that in the compendium. Project mapping, that's in the current ordinance right now. I should stop saying ordinance, I'm sorry, I'll put $1 in the jar when I do that next time, okay? The current guidelines talk about mapping where the project is, right? So we're going to continue to do that. Here's the new one. This is not in the guidelines. Neighborhood perceptions. I think it's important that you mail out a survey that comes from Town Hall that is objective, that lets the community give their feedback on perceptions of what it's like. Because you may find in that upper data set that the 85th percentile speed doesn't get you to the next step. It may be a mile or 2 under what your current guidelines are, but there's this perception that everyone's driving really fast. There's this perception that people are going over the limit, it's tight, it's congested, and you need to have that information objectively as part of this to get to step 3. So and that was a direct result of a lot of really good comments on the Facebook interactions, social media, but you need a way to quantify that. You can't just say, well, I read it on Facebook. We need to have that survey feedback, right? So all of that is step 2, believe it or not, which is a pretty rich, that's a wrong word, I won't say that. It's a very cost-effective way to get the data that you need when you're back here to say, okay, we're thinking about going to step 3 on Castle Peak as an example. So we would come to you and say, great, well, we're through step 2. We collected all of this information. You have the results in your packet, as does the community. Now they know what the data is. now we'll review that. You'll review that. That's under step 3 here, review data. TSC will say, we're going to review all of this information, and we're going to get feedback at this meeting about that data, about all that information. Then it gets to the hard part. This is based on your current guidelines, by the way. This is not new. You either determine if the project is eligible or ineligible to move ahead, right? If it's eligible, then you can go to step 4 and you begin to work with the neighborhood on the tools and strategies. If it's ineligible, meaning there's not enough data there to say that you should go to the next step, then the project can't be considered for 2 years, okay? So that's currently what you have in there right now. And then the most, I think, important step of this, which is a really great example that a lot of communities don't have, that you should really be proud of that's in there, and I think we should celebrate, is the community outreach piece. And so after you've had data, after you've had a conversation about it's eligible, all right, before we make a recommendation about what to do, we go to this step. And so in this step, it talks about a neighborhood design charrette, which is basically a really interactive design meeting that you'd have with the neighborhood to say, okay, let's talk about possible design interventions here. And so you would do that. You would then, after that meeting, identify the alternatives that the neighborhood suggests they would be comfortable with that you'd want to do. And then you mail out a survey to everybody in the neighborhood to say, here's what we're thinking about doing. We'd like to get feedback on this. Your current guidelines say that 50% of the affected households need to respond to the survey before you can come back to the TSC and move the project ahead. Now, it doesn't say which 50%, it just says 50% of the affected households. So you could, when you do this mapping, that's why this mapping matters. You're mapping who is going to be weighing in on these surveys and who's going to be giving input. You're almost creating it like a district of polling almost. But this 50% is in there, and it was required before you come back to this group before we can come back with a recommendation at this point. So assuming that happens after you've had the charrette and 50% of the affected households say, I want to continue, this is a good recommendation, then you can continue to step 5. And at that meeting, you either approve or don't approve the project. So these checks and balances are in here so that you get neighborhood feedback, you give comment as a TSC, you get neighborhood feedback and you get comment. This is the final piece. So you have now all of the data. You have the design recommendations for the tool that you're going to apply. You have the feedback survey from the neighborhood at that point that says, here's the direction we'd like to go. We'd like treatment X. You can either approve or not approve the project. What's challenging about this right now, the way that it's written, is that it says that you have to have 65% approval to move the project ahead. So even though you think it's a really good idea and there's maybe some safety reasons why you want to do it, but you don't have 65% approval from the neighborhood, the current guidelines kind of say you can't do it. So I wanted to call this out as kind of like, this is something that, someone may hold up in a meeting and says, it doesn't say it says 65% here, and we don't have it. We only have 45%. Why are you doing this? As a board and as a TSC, you have also higher interest in mind in safety and quality of life. So I wouldn't say that it's totally written in stone, but I wanted to call it out for you so that you know later on that that's what's in there. But it's an important part in the process in step 5. So I'm going to zip it here in a minute. I'm going to type and listen to comments, but this is a way to organize what's in there and introduce a few new pieces that I think will respond to what the residents have asked about in prior sessions.
So one of the questions I had is around how we determine the affected households. I saw in the details that we're saying it includes the renters, the resident property owners, the non-resident property owners. Are we considering a household to have responded if any one of those people responds? I'm thinking, let's say I rent, somebody else owns my house. Do we both get to respond? Does it count as part of the 50% if one of us responds? I'd like to see us get into the details on that a little bit more. I don't know that I necessarily have the best idea for how we capture that.
And do you want multiple responses from the same household?
Well, and specifically because we're saying we want to include both renters and property owners, that's especially where I think we're more likely to.
I read the spirit of that as being, you're not excluding renters, it is the resident of the household. So if you're a property owner, but you're not a resident of that household, I appreciate that that property owner has some voice in certain things, but this is traffic and safety in front of their house. I'm not gonna give their voice over the voice of a tenant just because they happen to be a tenant.
So we specifically call out non-resident property owners as being stakeholders.
Yeah, and I think, but for this, it's the non-resident property owner for things that might be a minor collector or other areas. I think they're potential stakeholders.
So do we want to define the pool of affected households differently depending on the issue?
One thing you could do with because you're doing these mail out survey, right? You could have at the top, whether it's a renter or owner. And then when you get the results back, you could look at it versus renters and owners to see who you're actually polling, who's weighing in.
Yeah, or choose not to respond. I want to be really careful here. I think this is really good work, right? So we had a process that even the Traffic and Safety Committee were not aware of the process, right? So something's wrong. Putting it on one page that we could hand out is a great first step. My very strong recommendation here is not to skip to step 5 here, but start layering in some additional things. Let's create the grid based on the process that exists today. Let's use it for what we should be. You know, we've got a couple things that are considering today, you know, some stop signs and some speed humps. We still didn't follow the process. Right, despite now 2 months later knowing about the process, we didn't follow the process. I was curious if we would, we didn't, right? So I think using the process that we have today, having a one-page handout that this committee and staff could distribute, I think makes perfect sense. But I think your suggestions are really good and they should be captured, and we should continue to think about what those suggestions are, and they're always available to this committee, staff, and others to layer in. But if there's a defined process, let's figure out if it works before we start creating new detailed process. My 2 cents. And while this is all really good, you know, we're not Berkeley, we're not Denver, we're a little 4 square mile town, so we do need to be aware. Let's just not over-engineer this thing. So.
Great advice.
That's my only feedback. I mean, if you take any of the major decisions we've made in the last couple of years, we were able to make them quickly. And if we follow the process all the way through, we could be looking at 6 months to get a stop sign put up, which in my mind is unacceptable, and depending on the intersection. So if we could streamline this to a degree to where it makes sense, you know, if it's a major collector or arterial, and maybe it requires more time, but if it's a local street, I don't want to spend 6 months debating it and, you know, trying to get, you know, perfect data where, you know, a lot of times it's not going to be a perfect solution.
So I wonder if it's just the inclusion at each step of determining which steps in the process it'll follow. So Neil, to your point around just putting a stop sign up, maybe we don't go through the data collection just for a stop sign. So maybe it's at the end of step 1, the TSC weighs in and says, yes, let's fast track this. We'll go ahead and put the stop sign in. For other decisions, it's, all right, let's go through step 2, and then let's decide if we take it through community outreach, or second fast track is don't do the community outreach. I'm with you. I think there needs to be flexibility in it.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
The only thing that gives me pause about that is the only thing in the book that we have to follow as registered engineers and planners is a stop sign warrant. So
I picked the wrong example.
yeah, so like speed hump, neck downs,
Yeah,
all of the,
fair enough.
even those signs that we talked about at the last meeting, they're not in the book.
Yeah.
But the reason why stop signs have this criteria is if they didn't have that, they would be all over.
And that's, you know, I was just actually thinking about the last meeting, we talked about the Pitkin and, is it Akron or Riverbend?
East Riverbend,
yeah.
Stop signs, right?
Yeah.
So, and I didn't see the decision-making process on that at the front end, but I know it was a pretty quick decision, and it's worked well. But I don't think we should want to have to spend, you know, 6 or 9 months on something like that, which we got to the right decision. But you're right, the code on stop signs is pretty strict, and rightfully so. But maybe for, you know, other calming measures, you know, maybe there can be a fast track.
Sure. and even for the stop signs, we could bring the warrant analysis to a meeting, and you say the neighborhoods are here, we support, we're going to move it ahead, right? We just want to be able to bring you the warrant just so that we're all on the same page, and it should back you up legally also if something did happen there. One of the reasons why you do the warrant is if, for whatever reason, a crash happened and there was not a established warrant analysis, it could put you in trouble as well as us, and we just want to get that clear. But I don't think you have to take 6 months through the process for that.
Okay.
Okay.
So then one other question I had around, especially the brief checklist. My impression was that the yellow was what was new. It sounds like that's not the case. The yellow is just what you're calling out.
I highlighted that, and some of that was discussion, like the 85th percentile, 5 mile and over the posted speed. That's what's in our guideline right now.
Okay.
We've never, I mean, most of the stuff that comes to you, we do a speed study and it's 28, but you guys still want to do something. So
the yellow represents areas you think we might want to consider.
you
Okay.
might want to discuss in the future, do you want to, are you going to hold fast to 5 miles over the
Well,
posted
again,
speed?
I mean, I think the process is good, but this committee can still make informed decisions. And if we determine that if something is not 5 miles, if something's 28 miles per hour, you could still make a decision to do a speed hump or anything else. This isn't restrictive, it's just data that's collected. So I appreciate the data that's graphed with the 85th percentile speed. I think that's all great, and I recognize that the traffic engineers will have a best practice, that best practice, unless it's 5 miles an hour, that's fine. But that's why we live in the community, and there is some perception. We are reflective of the perception of the community. But what Laura said, you lost me a little bit as well, because there was, as you went through this, the first, in box 1, the yellow was highlighted, and that was new. Box 2, I realized that the yellow wasn't necessarily new. So I think this is great. Let's just create the one-page handout based on the code for today. And then if you have proposed changes, we want to continue to talk for a few more minutes.
Right, okay, so we'll get a
What the-
checklist of what we're doing
What the
now.
approved proposed changes would do. I think we should look at that, and that should be
Yeah.
I'd like to see that as a properly noticed meeting. We're going to change the code, which says A, B, and C, and we're going to add D and E. And, okay, it's not the code. We're going to change the practice of A, B, and C, and we're adding D and E. That feels like it needs to be a noticed meeting where we're going to consider D and E and get the public feedback. For now, you're just streamlining an existing, confusing process, and I think that's great and really appreciate it. But let's not add anything. Now, things like the stop sign warrant analysis, if that's your best practice and that's required, you could do it as a call-out box, and if the code doesn't say it, and staff will also do a stop sign warrant analysis. Great, because that's what your practice requires.
So what I'd like to do is take this back and in yellow, show you things that, we'll have 2 versions. One is exactly what's in the code.
Right.
And then I'll have a second version, and the yellow will say anything new that we'd like you to consider moving ahead.
Yes.
So you can determine both of those.
I think that's great. And the 2 that I wanted to call out are the yellow that are in steps 4 and 5 right now.
Yes.
I am a little concerned about saying we need 50% of, I'm sorry, not the 50% of affected households to respond, but rather the 65% approval from survey responses. Particularly if we had 3 alternatives or 4 alternatives we're considering, there's no way we would ever get to 65%. To Kevin's point, although this committee can certainly overrule the process, I'd like to see the process be as close to what we plan to do as possible. Otherwise, we'll have citizens saying, you said it had to have 65%, it had 48, you guys made a bad call. And I don't want us to get into that situation. I'd rather write down specifically what we're doing, including saying, hey, at the end of step 1, we'll reevaluate whether step 2, 3, 4 is needed, et cetera.
So I'll read you, just so it's in your minds and in the record here, what's in your current guidelines. It says, affected households include renters, resident property
Yes.
owners, right, and non-resident property owners. 50% of affected households should respond, and 65% of the responding households must show support for project approval. So that's where I think that's the one at an upcoming meeting is worth making that change.
Yep, I agree.
That's the one in upcoming meeting where I think that change should be noticed.
Yes.
Not making the change.
Yes.
Notice to have a conversation about
Noticed
that and
about
get
having a
input.
conversation about it. This committee is not proposing making that change. We have not even one time within my 2.5 years used that 65% hurdle rate, right? So
Yeah.
let's use the 65, if
Yes.
we're proposing and there's also not really reference to materiality here. I'm not sure a speed hump requires this process. Maybe it does, maybe, I don't know, maybe it does, maybe it does not. A temporary speed hump.
Yeah.
A temporary speed hump might not require this process because it's just not material. We're gonna go try it out for a few months and
Yes.
see if it impacts things.
Yes.
I don't know.
Well-
But if there is, we have not, for a material change, for example, closing Weldona, this process was not followed.
So at the next meeting, what we'll do is we'll have one that's existing code, two as possible changes,
Right.
and we'll notice the meeting as a conversation around the neighborhood traffic calming program, and the community can weigh in on everything that we've just talked about. We're making no decisions, but we're going to have a meeting to get input on that.
And this committee wouldn't make those decisions anyway. This committee would either bring it to we would say, yes, this is a good idea, let's take it to the board for code change,
Okay.
or it doesn't even get past this committee to go to the board for potential code change.
Fair enough.
I would also like to suggest for the one pager, we add something that is in our detailed guidelines around what do we mean by traffic calming? And that gets to Kevin's point around, is a stop sign traffic calming? Is a speed hump traffic calming? Kind of what is eligible for this program?
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think this one pager might get passed around and people might say, well, why wasn't this followed for whatever safety decision? And it's a different decision.
Great idea. So I have some white space here that's been bothering me since we started it, so I'll occupy it with those tools as part of that.
Well, there's a checklist, and there's a appendix in the existing policy, and stop signs are not part of it.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Okay. Okay. So that's on that topic. And then I just wanted to show you one other data point before we move on. Thought you'd find this interesting. Oh, wrong computer. I just wanted to show you Lafayette as an example. And I know you're not Lafayette. But this is public road, and we had the same conversation on public road in Lafayette. So this is corridor traffic in Lafayette. How do I go to full screen here, Alex? Do you know how to do the
Shift
full-
F5.
Yeah. God,
Oh,
thank you.
You're on a Mac. Sorry.
Look at that. That worked. Okay. This is Monday through Sunday traffic volumes, and you can see during the week there's also this concern that daily traffic and the church traffic and all these things are going on, and so you can see the variation in during the week, which is not much, and then you could see the weekends, right? And so when you start to map this out, so this was in the north end of the corridor, and then someone said, well, you didn't do it the right spot. You got to go further down the street, and then you'll get the real results. So we went further down the street and went from 9 to 11,000. So there was a difference, right, in the corridor. So where you put the counter has some influence. You want to move the counter around a little bit too. So when I say 1 week, I'm really saying about 5 different data points, and we want to move the counter around a little bit. We want to do different days. There is some variation, and then you can get super nerdy with this. So this is vehicles that travel northbound every hour, right? And you would probably never do this on a local street, but just to show you that this is what we're talking about. We want to bring back the data. We want to bring it back in a more robust format. And someone said, well, what about Tuesday compared to Saturday going northbound? Okay, here we go. So there's different ways you can slice it, and it becomes mind-numbing, but I want to make sure that you have access to that data when you get to that step 3.
Perfect. As a data nerd, I look forward to it.
As a fellow data nerd, I look forward to bringing you goods.
One other question about the data collection. I'm
Yeah.
not sure if this is new or existing in the code, but when we say 1 week, can we instead redefine that as 5 days if we mean 5 days rather than 7?
Good. You mentioned 5 days, in which you wrote up to 7.
Yeah.
Either, I think 7 days would be more valuable, but I'm not sure if we can do that with town staff. So if we do mean 5 days, I'm not proposing a change in that, but let's call it out as 5 days.
Thank you for that clarification. Yeah, we need to get straight on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I shouldn't have said week.
Back to the agenda. Okay. So item 4, North Torrey's Peak.
Sure. Sure. Sorry. Of course.
I'm Mike Middich. I live at 1100 South Pitkin. I have some concerns about this term affected households, as you did. I live in what's what we call the speed zone on South Pitkin, the area between Riverbend and Rogan, okay, which is literally like eight houses, okay? But if you look at who's affected by the speed hump and the stop sign, it's everybody that lives down in that area, okay? The 8 people that live in my area, 8 households, were affected. Those other people are inconvenienced. So I think there needs to be a distinction there. Because if you have to have 65% of all those people, you're never going to get that. Because nobody's speeding in front of their houses. So.
I think you bring up a great point. We've seen that with other decisions as
Okay.
well.
I
I think as we get to the meeting where we discuss potential changes to the code,
Yeah.
I would definitely like to consider that. And maybe it's even, to your point, dividing respondents into 2 groups.
Right.
One is, these are the people who live right here, then these are the people who feel that they're affected by it. And that way, I wouldn't necessarily say we definitely always take one group over the other, but at least we have that data available.
All right, I just wanted to.
Great point. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's a really tough point, and we've done several surveys, like Waldona. We surveyed everything north of Rock Creek Parkway.
Right.
And when the surveys came in, we tried to, stratify them between those that live right on Waldona versus those that were traveling through the neighborhood, to give you that feel of how each group felt about it. But it would be nice if staff kind of took a stab at what the affected neighborhood and presented that to the TSC before we went, send anything out. Here's what we think is the affected
I think
neighborhood.
that's why it's important to be able to have the data to slice and dice, right? I mean, this is why we ran into this issue on a completely unrelated to traffic and safety on the sub-area planning project, right? Where you're getting respondents that are not necessarily directly affected. So, when you hear 65%, you're going to have the of what question.
Of what, right.
So, and I think so long as we have data around who the respondents are, then this committee and potentially the board can help solve for that of what problem. But I do want to be, while I think it's a great comment, thank you. I want to be really careful that we don't, again, over-engineer this. We are not Berkeley, right? I could see Berkeley, spending tens, if not hundreds of hours trying to determine, how many yards somebody must live away in order to be affected. I think we're just going to have to be able to use some judgment.
Right.
But having the data available will help us solve the of what problem.
True. Any other comments on that, or can we move forward? Okay, so on Torres Peak, we received one request from a resident that lives along there that thought there was a speeding problem and wanted TSC to look at something, and we had a trustee that basically forwarded that on to us, which we forwarded on to you. So do you want to apply the guidelines, our existing policy, and go back and say, give 4 of your neighbors to support you?
It sounds like a
Yes.
great idea.
I think that'd be great.
Okay.
I don't mean to kick the can, but this feels like the perfect
Yep.
I mean, unless there's some crisis with a, teenager, anybody who's driving 40 miles an hour and they're a teenager, they should dial 911, or an adult or anybody, dial 911. We're not kicking the can on a safety issue, but for, something like this, a traffic calming where we may make an investment in a cram down or something else, it'd be really helpful to see the data. She or he should follow the process.
Sure. And we did start collecting speed data on that.
Great.
But I want to go back to her because let her know, here's the process, here's a checklist, here's what you need to do, get your neighbors involved, and walk her through how this is going to work.
And so with that data collection, I know I saw the speed monitor up. Well,
it was on the speed monitor. We also have our new counters that
That's right.
are sleuth counters.
Oh, the one with the actual numbers, I was racing on foot and seeing if I could get it to a certain speed. But were those up for what these guidelines recommend, like the 7 days, the representative days, all of that?
Not the speed radar sign, but our
The
counters,
subtle
our
one.
counters were out for a
Okay,
week. Mhm.
perfect.
Cool.
So, all right.
I'm just gonna make one amendment that when we should try to get speed without that sign up.
Yeah.
Yes.
No.
That's.
The speed was with our sleuth traffic counters.
Got it. So just want to have that in the record. The speed is not with like, hey, this is your speed, because you get a false sense of.
Well, but if we're trying to collect the data at the same time that the register is up, people automatically see that thing. They start slowing down more because of this big sign.
So the speed sign is, we're not getting the speed data from the sign, we're getting it from an alternative device.
Yeah, there's that sleuthy
We've-
thing
In
behind
the
the
past,
stop sign.
we've used the speed radar to collect some data, and now we got new devices, so we can do it either way, so.
Right. I just want to clarify it for that record because it came up at the last one, where that sign is not influencing the speed behavior. We're actually getting the speed as a raw.
All right, there we go.
That's right.
Okay. Item 5, new requests. So last month, we heard from a resident about Rock Creek Circle, speed humps. So I wanted some direction on how we want to proceed with that. Here's another, that's kind of a collector. There are all the townhomes, and we have our trustee who lives in the area, whether we want to talk to the homeowners out there, the HOA, about that.
So can we take the same approach for that, where we go back to the resident who raised the concern, ask him to get 4 of his neighbors, and we
sure.
take that through the process as
I
well?
think that, well, I think that's a good idea. At the same time, I think this one's unique, right? Because the definition of an affected resident on a collector is going
Yeah.
to be hard to determine, yet we do have, you know, if only every neighborhood had a governing body that was supposed to speak for those neighbors. Oh, wait, we
Right.
do in the Summit, right? They have an HOA.
Right.
And so I do think that in this case, I would love to ask for the Summit HOA to weigh in on this, because I think that as many, so for the Tories and the Castle Peak residents that use this every day, we also have we have alternatives, right? As opposed to the folks that live in the Summit that frankly have no alternative. They are forced to use it, and they're pulling out of this, you know, they're making what, I don't want to call it a blind turn, because that's a, you know, it's a real, but they have a lot less visibility from there because of where the homes are, and frankly, the utility boxes, that the residents that are coming off Torrey's or Castle are going to have. So I think that one, I think we should talk about it. We could follow that process, but I think also taking it to the Summit, and the Summit might be able to get, you know, residents something right there.
There's also Yarrow, though. They have no alternative but to use that.
That's true.
And even Lower Castle, I mean, this is where I think, to Mr. Medick's point, Medich, sorry. I think we're going to run into trouble with how do we define affected residents. I mean, Lower Castle Peak, yes, you could go all the way up to the top of Torrey's and go out that way, but I would argue that probably most people don't do that. So we probably do need to survey a pretty big group if it comes to that survey.
What kind of speed data do we have on that? Have we collected speed data on that within the last 5 years or so?
Yeah, we did collect some, probably, I'm saying 4 or 5 years.
And the speed limit is 30?
I think it's 30, yeah. Yeah, we have an advisory speed coming around the corner of 25.
And what was the 85th percentile when we've collected it?
I think,
Roughly.
I think it was posted at 35, and then I think we lowered it because of the speed study we had.
And we've made some other changes with the striping as well as the all the new yield signs.
Yep.
Yeah, so I'm almost wondering if the speed
Yeah, we
issues
we added, there was
minimized.
nothing before, it was really wide, and
Yeah.
we striped the parking to kind of narrow the lanes. We
Yeah.
did the crosswalks that they didn't have any. We put the island.
Yep.
So we did a lot of things with the project. But there are, you know, right now, there's no protected way to cross.
Right.
Right, so.
Can we?
Excuse me, Sandy Hammerly, 2855 Rock Creek Circle. I do live in the Summit at Rock Creek. I did a little bit more research on this topic. It seems like the area that is of the most concern is coming up the hill from Starbucks. That would not affect the Yarrow residents to the degree that it affects the, because they're not coming out and trying to get across the traffic. So is where, and, yeah, I'm trying to get my.
Starbucks is right there.
Starbucks is right where the
Right
pool
there.
Okay, so when, you know, and all of us in the Summit truly appreciate the traffic calming that has occurred to date. The major problem, and I think the resident even who came, lives where you come up the hill, because what happens is it's blind
Yeah.
when you come from the traffic coming here and going up. The other problem is the traffic comes up very quickly from there, and we have a bus stop up there. And people fly up that hill, and they don't realize the children are in the crosswalk.
Yeah.
So it's a particular side of Rock Creek Circle that's the problem, and it's this, and you got the exact area right there. And that's the part that is the most problem. I also talked to a representative of the board, and we would be happy to host a meeting there, and we could certainly invite the Yarrow residents too. We don't have a lot of parking, but if we wanted to do something in that community, we could do that if, you know, wanted to offer that to traffic and safety if they were interested. But that's the issue, is this blind spot coming up this hill.
Yeah, I think it's, I think before, I mean, we could tempted to start brainstorming ideas to solve the problem,
Right.
but I think we need to start with the study, right? So this one feels like it's going to be a slam dunk to get 5 signatures, bring it also to the HOA, because it's, you know, we're lucky to have that HOA there. And I agree, you know, I mean, frankly, that's where, when I run on that pretty regularly, and that's exactly where I cross. And it's a little sketch, right? Getting across right there, so.
Okay, we'll work with the HOA and try to get the Yarrow people involved.
Yeah, I think in this one, it probably will move a lot faster because you're not knocking on doors to get those signatures.
Right.
So.
Okay. Next request we had was McCaslin in Indiana. See, Jack, you want to come and present your?
Oh, okay.
And I included your emails, so the traffic committee has your
Okay,
emails.
sure. Jack Cheng, 528 Zircon Way. Sorry, let me look for my email again. My bad. I mean, so basically, during my 12 years as resident in Superior, I have witnessed several close calls, whereas the residents, why is it? Okay. Whereas the residents live in Rock Creek, where I'm kind of situated. And as we wait at the stop sign, trying to get on McCaslin, okay, and actually it's the stop sign Indiana right there. I see a lot of traffic, downhill speeding traffic coming from McCaslin from this side. And then on the other side as well, right there, on the right side of McCaslin. So a lot of times I witness, neighbors and drivers, they wait there and then they are really focused on the downhill speeding traffic on this side, right? They are so afraid, so scared of this. And then somehow, you know, and then they have the combination of kids in the car, they kind of forgot about looking at this side as well. And then even if they pay attention, there's also that blind spot. I sent you that email. I don't think you guys have that. But anyhow, so it will be a blind spot, not able to see the cars coming from this side. Yep, this side. And then so as they are driving, they're focusing on this. They might forgot this, or they cannot see it because of the blind spot. And then they cross and they almost get hit on the right side. So that's what happens a lot of times in these incoming traffic here as they wait here. And then so again, I must have witnessed 50 times in the 12 years. And as we know, there's been a long time ago when I first moved in, there's been a fatality on that intersection. I think maybe 10 to 12 years ago when I first moved in. And so there's some kind of vigil there, a White Cross vigil, But as recent as 2017, I want to say September or maybe July, 2017, there's been there's been a bicyclist and a truck accident. And then so the bicyclist was coming this way, going downhill, and then this truck was going this way. I don't know if it's maybe blind spot, maybe something, I don't know what it is, but it was, yeah, accident. So that's the most recent one. And then, so again, my whole thing is, I know that there's been discussions about roundabouts, but as you can see, this is not as wide as over there by Coal Creek and McCaslin. We could have a, huge roundabout, a wider roundabout, but the thing is, there's not enough there for a roundabout. But I think most important of all, I mean, the roundabouts,
Really quickly, that's a test. No one should worry.
Oh, okay. All right. So again, I think most importantly, the reason why we, like a lot of us, want a traffic signal there is because that way there's a definitive right of way. Instead of like, if people doesn't know how the runabout works, you get in that situation. Or, I mean, you could, I think I could reference from the previous accidents that occur in McCaslin. There's a lot of drunk driving accident. There's a fatality where the other side of Starbucks as well. Okay, so there's a lot of that going on. So I don't think runabout works, but traffic signal will work. And then for those that I have met with and spoke with, the neighbors and drivers, live in Superior, they say that they only request a traffic light to be on, active and on, during the mornings, like in the weekdays, like 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. That's when they, hit a lot of traffic and stuff like that. So, and then again, my whole thing is, it's pretty dangerous, waiting here, waiting for the traffic, and then getting across. It's been kind of really a nightmare, pretty much, yeah. So, but anyhow, I want to thank you guys, Alex and everybody, for including this into the agenda. And I want to thank you all for your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jack. Alex, I have a question. In one of Jack's emails, he had mentioned that the spot would be he thought it might be too narrow for a roundabout. Do we know if that's the case? Is a traffic light our only option?
Well, we would have to look at that.
Okay.
I think that, you can maybe move the roundabout, McCaslin has 200 feet of right-of-way, although
Okay.
to the
So it'd be similar to the one at Colton and
right,
McCaslin.
to the west, we have some slopes. To the west, we have some slopes.
Just checking that one because I wasn't
Right.
sure. Thanks.
And, some background on that, the chair of the planning commission was really pushing a roundabout last couple of years. The board has programmed funds for this intersection in our CIP. Whether it's a roundabout or a traffic signal, we would go through an extensive process of analyzing the intersection, looking at whether there's the MUTCD traffic signal warrants, just like a stop sign warrants, there's warrants for a traffic signal. There's certain situations where roundabouts work and where they don't. So we would look at, alternatives analysis of traffic signal versus a roundabout, both of which are pretty expensive.
Right.
So, it's a budget decision. If you would like us to do some analysis before your budget, it's not in next year's budget.
2021
CIP.
is where it is.
It's like 2022 is where it's programmed. So if you want us to work on it this year, we could, but it's something's programmed for 2022. And prior to that, to the budget decisions, we would probably conduct an analysis like this. So you have that information to determine, how much to budget for.
So just a quick, comparing the width of the Colton roundabout and this one. So I've drawn with this yellow line here, 160 feet of inscribed. That's about the dimension that you would need. Alex's point about you can move it in different places, but that 160 feet would be basically in the back, getting close to the backyards of these two properties to the north and south here. And then they have pretty significant downhill grade there as well, more so than any other location around here. So the approach grade coming northbound is also something that would have to be kind of considered with that, right? And then just on the signal front, signals, work great during the peak times. At the off-peak times, they create more delay, right? So why you do the signal study is you determine during the peak times, are the side streets being served? And then the off-peak times, how much delay exists for them. So although you may be reducing delay during those morning and evening hours, it may be increasing delays for all the rest of 22 hours of the day. And the last thing that's really critical is the signals themselves. You always have to have the signal on. There, you can't have on-demand signals, right? So the signal always has to be activated in order to get compliance. The idea with the signals, you want safety. That's why, part of the reason why you do it. And having a fully functioning signal 24 hours a day is absolutely critical to have. But the other thing that maybe some interesting things to study are some short-term fixes there that don't require a $300,000 signal or a $2 million roundabout, would be to possibly look at the geometry at that intersection, so the striping, and where that stop bar exists relative to where the visibility angles are. So I'll speak to this stop bar here as an example. Where is that in the right position? Could we move that? The bike lanes themselves, there's new treatments that just came out in new guides about using some green treatments, some red treatments, some additional signage. So there's some ground marking work that you could do cost effectively that won't stop everything from happening. You can't, driver behavior is driver behavior, but there may be some things before that bigger step that we could look at as well. But we wouldn't do that unless you kind of directed us that that's something that we should work on. Final point, this is an example of one of those, that column in the beginning, step 1. This is one of these ones on an arterial that we were talking about that's not in your program currently, right? So this is another kind of example of that.
So I think from my perspective, I'm really worried about McCaslin and the volume of cars in McCaslin and trucks in McCaslin, particularly if 470 is going to get extended. So anything we could do, this to me is a targeted intersection that needs work, right? It's not going to be worked on in 2019 unless we make some small changes around striping or something else, but certainly if the striping's in the wrong spot, and yeah, I love those green cyclists, so we should absolutely put those cyclists there. But this is very complex because people fly down that road. I've caught myself going way too fast on that road. And the flasher is really helpful there because it brings awareness for folks. But I used to make that left turn every day, and it wasn't risky enough for me that I go down to the roundabout, but I certainly didn't love it. And you could tell that when you're stuck behind a car or two a lot of people are really uncomfortable. If you've got a car that might stall out or doesn't have the pick-me-up that somebody else's car may have, pulling out in front of somebody that could be going 55, 60 miles an hour, which is not the speed limit, but it's risky. So yeah, I'm all about targeting this to do something in 2022. And I personally think this would, aesthetically, I'd love to see if a roundabout can work. I'm sort of sold on the roundabouts from a safety perspective and an aesthetics perspective. For those that, roundabouts, if you have a traffic light and there's an accident at that traffic light, you're probably not walking out of that accident. If you're going to, in Sergeant Loveday or Sergeant Chamberlain's viewpoint, but if you bump into somebody in a roundabout because they didn't understand how to stay in their own lane, you're still having dinner with your family that night. And so I feel really strongly about safety as the priority. I think this needs to be fixed, but I want to fix it right. And my instincts tell me a roundabout is right, but if we can't squeeze in the roundabout there because of the design, okay, we should do something else. And that means that if we're spending $500,000 instead of $2 million, maybe instead of 2022, it could be 2020, 2021 or something. So that's why I think you're doing some thinking about, Jack, I really appreciate you bringing this to the town. I think doing some thinking about this makes a lot of sense to me.
One other idea for a potential interim fix before 2021, I find that part of the difficulty with turning left off of Indiana is you have a car stopped in the right lane waiting to see if they can turn. They can't see around you because you're in the left lane. You can't see around them because they're in the right lane. I'm wondering, because there are those two lanes to the right, really the downhill traffic should be staying in that to the left of the bike lane. The right turning traffic, I'm thinking, should start in that lane to the right of the bike lane and then merge over. Maybe that's incorrect, but I think that's what should happen. Going the other way. So if you're coming off of Indiana and you're turning right, yes, I'm thinking you should make your right turn into that lane where you're not affected by the oncoming traffic. I just saw today at Flatirons Mall, they have bollards set up where you are forced to turn into that right lane. I'm wondering if that would help, because at least then the right turning traffic wouldn't necessarily have to worry about the cars that are coming
It's
down.
not quite as wide as you think. And the cyclists, I actually don't like what we've done with the cycling lanes here. I think so. I've been in a situation where I've been on a bike coming down the hill and I'm in my lane and some car is now passing me on the right, going 30 miles an hour before they slow down. Yeah. And I've got a car on my left that's going 45 miles an hour. That's a bad practice. And then I've also been driving, and this just happened to me last week. I was driving down the hill and the cyclist was correctly in his lane. And then so I didn't feel comfortable passing him right. And so I just slowed down. And so now the cyclist thinks, I'm a safe distance behind him, and he thinks I'm some lunatic that's going to run him over or something. And so it was just a really bad, unsafe situation. I think the which is why just replacing this thing with a roundabout, we haven't quite gotten the striping for the cyclist right in the roundabout over here, but we will, right? But it's a whole heck of a lot safer in here. This is a bad intersection.
So I completely agree with you on the roundabout, and I would support that. I'm just thinking if it takes 4 years to get that, could we throw up some bollards in the meantime, and would that at least help a little bit? Maybe not, but
I don't see that as a merge lane.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem, because I think a lot of people don't, because there's no standard gutter barrier on the side, so they just zip right over.
And that's why I'm not sure which it is, but could we turn it into?
But I mean, Kevin, your point about the bike lane is right, and that's the reason I avoid riding on the Castleton anymore, because the bike lane is discontinuous, which is frightening.
I don't understand why we put.
I mean, I get how we got there, just to kind of segment the traffic out a little bit, like Laura suggested. It sort of allows for the speed up, slow down. But we've got the same thing at the top of McCaslin over here. People coming off Rock Creek zip over to the left lane because the roundabout's down at the bottom of the hill. People just don't know how to use merge lanes still.
Right.
But the bike lane, it troubles me because it's been moved away, and now we create a bigger risk situation for bike lanes.
So I'm going to propose two things. Number one, Alex, and I've asked you this before, can we get a bicycle advocacy group to make some recommendations for us? There's enough cyclists in Boulder, Colorado, in the county. I know there are best practices that the traffic and safety engineers recommend, but unless I haven't seen you guys in your spandex lately, I want somebody that's actually riding every day to have a voice in this. And this is the wall, right? I mean, people come from all over the world.
Well, this is going down the wall, though.
I understand, but they want to ride this. I mean, this is a really popular, fun place to ride. So you guys have heard me say it. I don't like that cyclist, I think about that poor guy that got hit, and we're making a decision right now to not move a bike lane, to not recommend 2022 funding being moved up. So if there's another accident, I don't like it. So anyway, so two recommendations, let me be clear. Number one, let's do a study now and figure out, can the traffic circle fit there? If it can, let's think about it. If the traffic circle can't fit there, let's accelerate the light beyond what it's planned for.
Well, I think we also have to decide, do we have to wait to 2022?
Right.
For the traffic circle.
Yeah. I mean, that was a decision made 6 months ago. As we get to the 2020 budget, it's worth reevaluating the timeline.
Right. So I think doing some traffic, some volume studies, some speed study on that would be helpful. We also may know a lot more about
JPPA.
Right. By then.
Or JPHA.
And then second, Alex, let's just get a cyclist opinion on that bike ride. I'm a novice, right? Let's find somebody in Boulder, some cyclist group.
Yeah, Boulder County has a coordinator, and they're plugged into that whole bike group out there, and I'll I'll use their help to get people involved in it.
So, Kevin, on that note, I just set up a program through Patrick. So it's a bike advocacy group that works with the county and county transportation. So now they're going to schedule some meeting through Parks and Rec with bicyclists and drivers to kind of get them to share the road more. So that'd probably be a good group, and I'll get the contact information from Alex as well.
Thanks. And your opinion on traffic circles versus traffic lights?
I hate traffic circles. I wouldn't trade them for anything.
And then Carlos, Carlos, I was also going to ask, do you have an opinion on any temporary measures like bollards or anything else?
So I do, and it's based on a woman who works for our company. She's an engineer. She's a Leica engineer, and she's the only certified bike designer by an organization called NACDO. And she would have opinions about this, and I'm going to ask her about that. And the reason why you want her to do it is she's current with what the CDOT standards are. CDOT's going away from the right-hand turn deceleration lane there that interfaces with a bike lane, particularly where the speed is posted over 35 miles an hour. So your design out there is outdated based on the current CDOT vision of the world when it comes to bicycles. They don't like putting this is a right-hand deceleration lane. They don't like sandwiching the bicycle between the through and the right anymore when it's a 5.5-foot lane. So there is a series of alternatives you could do here. The conundrum is that this is you have vertical downhill here. It's not flat. And so the whole reason why that right-hand decel is there is to prevent rear end crashes, correct? So when someone's making a right-hand turn, they want them in a separate lane going downhill. And so when you do that, the practice has been when you have a right-turning vehicle, the safest position for someone on a bicycle is sandwiched in between the right-turning vehicle and the through, so they don't get right-hooked.
Right.
That's the predominant history. What's changing now is they're saying the bike lane would actually merge over here onto a protected raised path, and that at that intersection, the bikeway would come back in and over and around. So it actually would be protected through here. So the idea here is when cars are coming up here, they're actually driving on a mound. You see these in Boulder when you're making a right-hand turn.
Right, you see in Aspen does, so, right, Aspen.
And they just did one of these on State Highway 82. So the idea is someone who's on a bicycle is over here on a protected off-street side. There's one over here going north, and then there's one over here going south. And that where the conflict, so that way when everyone's going 45 miles an hour, they're protected off-street. When you reach the conflict point, which is the right-hand turn, the right hook, and even the left hook for that matter, conflict, you're at the intersection closest to the car. The other challenge with this intersection is that you're not at the edge of the vehicle. So the edge of the vehicle is here. It has some time to accelerate before they see you. When you put this condition into here, you actually have the person on a bicycle closer to the intersection, which is recommended. So there's a whole bunch of new CDOT guidance on this. And we want to hear from the advocacy community, but you want to hear from the engineers as well, because ultimately they're the ones that will come up with a striping plan for this. I think
want to hear from the bicyclists whether they'll use it.
And that's the other fear, is that if you create something like this, people will still be in the lane. So we could do within the time that we have allocated for this year for support is we could have Alicia look at this, and we could put together what would a $10,000 striping plan look like out here if you wanted to make some changes this year or next year. And she would be able to look at that, and we could bring that back to you. And then we could put together notes on what a larger intersection safety study would look like here. To Commissioner Ryan, to respond to your 2-point comment.
Yeah, that's great. I think this is important stuff. So.
I just would add, I think it's important that in the near term, we fix it both for bicyclists and for cars when there aren't bicyclists, I think is still a major problem.
So we'll look at the geometry as it relates to visuals, those sight distance areas. We'll think about the stop bars. We'll think about some signage that exists now in the MUTCD that is available there. And we can bring back a concept. We won't spend a lot of time on it to be sensitive to your budget, but we can bring back a concept. And if that concept seems like we'll put a price to it, and then you can know if it's something you maybe want to move up.
Great.
And I think
go ahead. I was going to say, just to throw it out there, even though someone will probably hate it, what about eliminating left turns? Left turn off of Indiana or the left turn off of McCaslin?
A great question. The ones on McCaslin are there to prevent
those are
rear
the
ends.
greatest conflict areas.
Right, so the left-hand one going northbound, that's there to prevent rear ends. right? So that you have a separate, you have a through lane, and then you have a left lane that's to get out of the through vehicle traffic stream. Just like in that one there, the right-hand turn, it's to prevent rear end crashes. So by removing them, particularly maybe at this one as well, you get more delay in queuing, right? You get more stacking, and when you have that happen, you
No,
get
I'm sorry, let me clarify. Rather than eliminating the turn lane, eliminate the left turn option.
I would definitely have a major problem with that.
It's just, we're just brainstorming here.
Make it
because-
right in, right out?
Make this one right in, right out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We tossed this around for Weldona.
Well, where that would start would be getting counts to understand how many left-hand turns you
Let's
have
get
there.
the study.
Right.
Let's do some study.
Yeah, this is the fun part. What we want to do, we got to do the
Right.
boring part first, which is get the data, think about the design implications. But I think in terms of the immediate, can you throw some paint down there and some signs with a cost-effective improvement and try to start working on it? Even those things, when you do those, they have a 6-9 month, whoa, there's something going on here. I start to pay more attention impact as well.
Right.
I can't say it would be long-term.
Just want to make sure that whatever we do, it's not just for cyclists and it's
Yes.
not just for cars.
Yes.
But we do a lot in this town just for cars, and then you say, oh, what about the cyclists or the pedestrians? And it's a bit of an afterthought. So any design we have, even if a preliminary design, I want to make sure that both are considered, please.
Can I ask something? Of course. Oh, yeah, my bad. I totally forgot about this. So again, Jack Cheng, 5280 Conway. So this area, even though in the picture, it looks very clear that there is the,
Yeah.
like the path in front. But right now, there's a lot of gravel. The coloration of the gravel looks a lot like the road. So we have, well, residents, they know that, oh, this is gravel, so they go like that. But I see non-resident drivers, they went like this.
Yep.
Went through that. So I don't know, is there anything that we could do to make it more, I don't know, maybe a signage or something visible? And this happened, yeah, oh, right there. See how this gravel, this
Oh,
is.
we need
like
delineators
red
or
now,
something,
right? But it gets, I guess, I don't know.
Especially when
gray.
there's snow on it, yeah.
Yeah, gray over time, so people will be driving kind of like this, and I see people drive out like this.
Yeah, we could probably add some delineators or some vertical elements to.
Yeah.
To kind of delineate where the road is and where the
Yep.
landscaping is.
Yeah, so again, these will be, this will be gray, it's not red anymore, it's gray. Or whatever the road condition or the snow condition, weather condition. So people drive like this, and they went up, they almost hit this guy right here.
Okay,
So that's
Thanks.
another thing that I just thought of.
thanks.
Thank you.
See?
Okay, we have one more request, and Ally, you want to come up?
Hi, my name is Allie Hopper, and I live at 475 Blackfoot Street in Sagamore. And right now, we're seeing a lot of issues with traffic, more congestion there, higher speeds there. We have several families with small children who want to walk to the parks or walk to Target, to the marketplace there. And so there are two issues. That's kind of the overarching issue, that there's just more speed, more cars in that intersection. And the other is all of our children get on the bus and get off the bus right there. And we're seeing lots of cars blow by the school bus when the stop sign is out. And so that's a huge concern. We currently have a sheriff sitting there when the kids get on the bus, and he has pulled someone over. But I think only once now. We see cars blow by all the time. We were seeing them. So I think the sheriff presence is great, but I don't think that's sustainable, or it's a resource that we want to be using there every day, both in the morning and in the afternoon. So we would like to see something change there. The crosswalks they're just not visible really. It's such a large width of the road. They're not raised, they're kind of fading. There was recently, I think the town wrote "look" at every side of the crosswalk. And that's sort of like a pedestrian shaming thing, like it's not the pedestrians' issue, it's the cars right now. And also the look just kind of vanished. It was not high visible. It was like dark red and dark blue. So we would like to look into some options to help mitigate the safety concerns that a lot of the neighbors have right now.
Thank you. Can you remind me where the bus stop is exactly here?
Yep, if you can just bring it down a little bit. Sorry, it's like right here. So it's just before the intersection. And we see cars coming this way past the school bus, but also coming around the school bus because this is 2 lanes here. And it's really, really
And
wide.
where's the drop-off? Same?
Same, yep.
So the drop-off and pick-up, kids are not crossing?
Yep. And although there are some children who are crossing, because the new neighborhood that went in over here
Right.
has some children who walk along. So they're from here and they walk here and cross over to get onto the school bus. They often cross over before the bus is there, which is also a safety concern because there is nothing to prevent people from driving. And it's just really hard to see these small kids trying to cross a very, very large
So,
road.
Alice, can you pull up from last month, you guys know where I'm going, the pictures from Louisville with the island and the inexpensive sign?
Yes, you have to give me a minute.
I want to get your opinion on something.
Sure.
So hold on, please. This is a really good one for
Yeah.
us to consider, so thank you.
Right. All right. So as you recall, we did discuss this in December of 2007. And we had a few options that we presented as things that we could implement, including a pedestrian refuge where you put an island in the middle, rectangular rapid flashing beacons if we wanted to do that, or a 4-way stop. I've been talking with Ally, and she's mobilizing her neighborhood, and she has some urban design people over there that would like to, talk about some options. So we actually have a.
Yeah, we're going to be meeting here on Thursday evening with a bunch of the parents from the neighborhood. And one of them is an urban planner. And he has a bunch of ideas. He did work like this in North Carolina before they moved here. And I've also done a bit of research, and I saw Alex's proposal that he presented to you guys in 2017. But I think we can also add some new ideas to that as well.
That's it.
This one?
That. What do you think about that, Ally?
I mean,
So,
I'd be happy with anything that makes it safer right now at this point.
People are, you you can't stop stupid, right? If somebody's coming the opposite direction, and they don't know that the stop sign applies to them, that's really bad and super dangerous. But what is impossible to me is that cars would drive around a stopped school bus to pass it. And this this physically prevents that. You'd have to go in the opposite lane to do so, which,
Although, would you, because right now we have 2 lanes.
well, I think we would make the pedestrian island such that,
So we did the same thing here. This used to be the left-hand turn lane, and you delete the left-hand turn lane with this refuge median so that the bus is basically situated here. And to Commissioner Ryan's point, you have to go into the oncoming lane because you've deleted the left-hand turn lane.
Yeah. And maybe because there's so much space and you'd be deleting that lane, you could also, I forget what it's called, but there's a way to sort of make the pedestrian crossing amount of distance shorter by sort of.
Put bulb outs,
pulling this
put bulb outs into the.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
maybe that could also help since we have a lot of room to play with here.
Yeah, the bike lane could merge, and Alex's point, you put bulb outs here, and then the median refuge is here. So this through lane kind of splits almost the left-hand turn pocket and the through lane, so it's kind of in that zone. And there's 10 feet of crossing versus today you got to cross 5-foot black bike lane. There's 55 feet of crossing distance here. So just to go back to the picture Commissioner Ryan was suggesting, the idea here is that now this crossing distance, I'll make it full screen, the crossing distance is only 12 feet. So the crossing distance now, we didn't even bulb out in this one. We could to get it narrower, but you're doing that. And then in this example, we have to decide, this one doesn't have a stop sign condition, right? So you can do these with stop signs. You can leave the stop sign, but in this one, just as a notification, we did just the yield to crosswalk here. I think you probably would want to leave the stop sign, but we would introduce this median, right?
So which stop sign are you referring to?
No, if we had a four-way stop,
We don't have a four-way.
the intersection
We
doesn't
don't
have a
have
stop, yeah.
We don't.
No.
Oh, there's not a four-way stop here.
Oh, that's the problem.
Holy guacamole. Okay, so yeah. Yeah,
Got a
man.
traffic guy to say, holy.
Guacamole. It was actually holy guacamole for the record, but yeah, yeah. So you could take the Louisville example here with the yield compliance. You could basically do the same thing without having to pull out a stop sign. My concern was the stop sign, but it's not there yet. You could start with this one. And then in this one here, we talked about this last time, but this is, there's no curb line change in this one. Alex, we could do the curb line change, but just this alone, right, we went to a pretty high level of stop compliance here, right? So.
And then would you do that on both sides,
Could.
both directions?
Great question. So let's just do, so you get it in the record, I'm just going to get to the right. So close your eyes if you're seasick here. So in this condition here, right, you'd put the median like right here.
Yep.
You could have it there. You could also have it here,
I
right?
think it's really important to do that because it's, I always think of it where the bus stop is, and I also live on that half, but there's this whole half mirrors the other half, and there are plenty of children on this side as well.
And you had neighborhood crossing to the park.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the park's only 6 years old. I mean, this should have been done 6 years ago. This feels like,
So in this case, she's getting the neighborhood together,
yeah, the 5 signatures are done, right? And that's not, right?
right?
It's
And
not.
we're already starting the process of generating options and going through. So this one could move pretty quickly. We'd like to determine whether there's some things short-term, low cost we can do now. If we involve meetings or something, we may have to just budget it, get enough information so you can make a budget decision or decide, whether to do it, later on this year. Maybe you can get this done before school starts in August.
I think that's everybody's goal right
That'd
now
be
is
great.
to really.
So I wanted to come here
mobilize.
tonight because maybe we can get all this stuff done by June meeting and you can look at
I
some of
would
the
love
results.
to. I think this, we looked at this a couple years ago and, we striped it. And those look things aren't, please understand, we're experimenting with things, so.
No, absolutely.
In case anybody's watching from home, a lot of people in the community worked really hard, so we're not trying to shame pedestrians. I was also surprised when I heard about it, that I thought it would be more a visual for the cars. And then when they went up, I was like, oh, this is a visual for the pedestrians. I was also surprised. We're experimenting with that. You're going to see a lot more of those throughout town. We're involving the community. And so I think those are great things. And so we'll improve. We'll get better paint. We'll figure things out, but,
Yeah, absolutely. I think what.
The radius is what.
I support any of those kinds of efforts as well. I think for this particular intersection, though, it's really about getting the cars to be aware of the small children and families who live in this area, and it's just a really big road
And
to
in
be
case
right
one of the deputies isn't there, if you just jot down that license plate, I'm sure they'll get a little visit that day, so.
Yeah, no, we've actually had parents park their cars on the other side and block the road when the bus comes. It's.
Wow, I don't think so. Very excited, Rush. So I'm being careful here. I've been scolded before. But if you just would be kind enough, so I think you'll probably, hopefully we'll see some increased patrols there, continued patrols.
Yeah, no,
Jot down
absolutely.
some license plates, and if you have a repeat offender, they will be dealt with accordingly.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
But
Thank
yeah,
you,
let's
you
fast track
guys.
this. This is great. Really good work, and thanks for mobilizing the community.
Yeah, thank
When
you.
on Thursday? Can I come?
Yep,
Yeah,
5:30.
right here on 5:30. Let me see.
Okay, cool. Try to come.
Alex, before we leave it, because I think we are going to talk about it in a little bit, but you know, one of the things I do want to understand in the aggregate is the cost of these concrete refuge, because I honestly feel like there's about 30 places in town we can just start dropping them. And if it's sort of, you know, let's get this into the budget and start prioritizing the different neighborhoods that need them. You know, as you and I talked about the safe routes to school, there's a lot of different areas in town that could benefit from these things. I mean, honestly, as I looked at this in the agenda last week and I drove down it, I can't understand why there's left turn lanes on Sycamore. I mean, is the volume so high that we needed to put left turn lanes in? Because that creates a bigger problem for pedestrian, because if the car waiting to turn and then you're trying to look past it. So the concrete refuges will help get rid of those. But, you know, in the aggregate, I do want to understand how we can sort of, I don't know, get some economies of scale.
Right, you know, this roadway was designed as a major collector and meant to hook up to McCaslin.
Yeah.
And so it was designed for 4 lanes and a turn lane. So we did restripe it to take away, it used to be striped for 4 lanes.
Well, you know, and you can see that, yeah.
So we tried to stripe it, put a bike lane and then some parking lanes we don't need 4 lanes up there.
Yeah.
And certainly to restripe it all, that's, you know, we have to remove it, or, you know, do we do it now, or do we overlay the road and do it right? So
that's true.
I think there's some short-term stuff we can do with the pedestrian refuge, but in the long term, maybe we rebuild the intersection and do the bulb outs and other things as well. But we certainly can put the pedestrian refuges in fairly quickly.
And I can't speak for the school, obviously, but why can't the bus turn right and go around the loop in there? Thank you.
Can't fit.
So again, this is something that we're kind of working on. Jeanette Cunning is our school resource officer in the area. She's working with the school transportation district on doing something different with that bus stop. They started working on it just before spring break. And they've been back one day. I haven't seen Jeanette, so I don't know where they're at on this process. So as I get more information, I'll send an email to Alex and he can get it to the board. But they are trying to work on something from the school side as well as from Alex's side. So
Great.
Thanks.
Okay.
We have a lot of audience here. Do we have other items that we want to talk about? Anybody want to come up? I can give you some updates as the last part of the agenda. On the Waldona closure, design was finalized. We put it out to bid. We got bids back. We selected a contractor. And the work should be starting on Monday, next Monday. There will be a little bit of a delay in the final closure in that the bollards, remember that we picked out, or have an 8-week lead time. So the barriers will have to stay in place. We can do everything else, but the barriers will have to stay in place until we get the bollards to finalize it. So it's ongoing. Castle Peak speed humps, will be getting those, the permanent one on Castle Peak, you decided to put that permanently. We'll have that done probably in early May. And then we'll be moving reinstalling the 2 temporary speed humps that we had, and that'll probably be occurring towards the end of April or early May. One will go on Pitkin, and one will go up on Castle Peak.
Which location on Castle Peak for that one? Which location on Castle Peak?
It'll be, can you bring that up?
Right there. Up, down, down. Yep.
So we'll have one down here, and then remember we had one here that was kind of diagonal.
Yep.
We're gonna put one in this location here.
Okay.
And that's about halfway between the stop sign, these 2 stop signs. So we'll put one here, and down the road, we could put another one over here. So we'll try that out.
And then any on Upper Castle Peak? Any on Upper Castle Peak, south of
No.
Mount Sopris?
Oh, well, yeah, there's one, this
Sorry,
one,
the most southern part of Castle Peak, the top of the hill.
and then
So
the
other
other,
direction.
yeah, the other direction.
Other south.
Yep, so that part south of Mount Sopris, will anything go in that area?
No, we could test other ones. We did, last year we had 5 or 6 potential locations. And TSC decided to test out the temporary speed humps to see if we had any reduction in speed or volume.
Right.
And so one of the ones where we had the temporary one had good speed reduction, so we decided to make that one permanent.
Yep.
And then test out another temporary location. So that's about as far as we've gone on that.
So has there been any thought to testing a temporary location south of Mount Sopris?
No,
Will we have any temporary speed humps available for deployment once the permanent is done?
well, we have 2 right now.
We have 2 ready for deployment.
Right, one will go on Pitkin and one will go on Castle Peak.
Okay, so we have none, we have none
No,
on the bench.
right.
Everybody's in the game, using your
Right.
voucher.
Right.
Okay.
Hmm?
Can you state where the permanent one is going in Castle Peak?
Yeah.
The very bottom of the hill.
The temporary ones there.
Right here, where the temporary one was before.
And when is construction going to start on that?
That'll probably be in early May.
Did you consider waiting until school's out?
No, we were actually waiting for the contractors to get rolling with asphalt and for snow to be done with. So, but I met with our engineer, we're getting all our plans, and we're getting the contractors lined up. So as soon as I can get that done, it may happen in late April. On item D, Coal Creek Drive, Akron intersection, we talked about that last month, and we have design underway. And as soon as we get that, we'll get some contractor pricing and move forward with that. We'll probably have something at the June meeting to give you costs and, schedule. So run that by you, I think, before we get that implemented. Yeah. Right.
A little further
Go
up.
further north.
Yeah.
Further north,
I think,
right there.
I mean, as long as we can try to get that in place before school starts,
Right.
that if we're.
So we'll have, the final design and pricing in June.
Yeah.
Just run that by you. And then
I
get
think once we get a couple of these, I think Neil made a good point. Once we get a couple of these, people are going to say,
Okay.
wait a minute,
Yeah.
I want one. So.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think these are, I love the design. I love that Louisville already went through this because it's something I want to copy.
And you look at some of like Coal Creek, but Indiana.
Yep.
Do we really need turn lanes?
Right.
You could do something else.
Right.
That's all I have. The committee has other things.
Item E. Speed limit.
Oh, Coal Creek speed limit, we're taking counts. And we'll have some results when we return with the Akron design in June. So we'll have some recommendations then.
And then for the public that's here, what roads are going to be dug up in town?
So for our street project this year, we will be doing Colton. Colton from Rock Creek Parkway to Indiana. A couple things on that, just so you're aware. We'll probably be doing it like we did in Caslin, where we shift the traffic over and have side-by-side traffic on one side of the median. And we'll probably have to close the access to where the Land Rover used to be. There's 2 access points. Close that for a couple weeks. There's a way out. There's also on the Safeway side, we'll have to close that access for a couple weeks. We'll probably be able to work with the other access. So Safeway will always have 2 access points, but
And when will that project start and stop approximately?
we're hoping to bring the bids to the board, second meeting in May, and start work just around July 1st.
So great, so it'll be closed for the 4th of July.
Well, we won't, we'll just be starting. We'll have concrete work, so in our code, we have certain days we can't work on, and we'll make sure, we always.
Let's just be, let's just be aware that we'll have parking for the 4th of July. And a lot of people bike or walk, but.
Yeah, we're aware of the community events, and we'll try to avoid them. We'll try to get it done before Chili Fest if we have it over there, so.
Great, very good. Okay.
I got one more thing. So we got about 8 weeks left of school. It's warming up. Kids are starting to ride their bikes, walk a lot more. Indiana at Heartstrong and Mount Sopris. I know before the meeting started, you talked about getting a little portable vertical yield sign to drop in the middle of Heartstrong, or middle of Indiana at Heartstrong. But, I know Mount Sopris continues to be a challenge. I don't know what else we might be able to do, some of those signs. I don't know. I don't know what it is about folks, and I'm a parent, and I'm going to chastise other parents after they drop their kids off. Apparently it's, race home or race somewhere else. I don't honestly know what else to do to slap some parents upside the head about, watch out for the other kids too.
All right. So another request we had is to take signs like this at, if you know where Heartstrong in Indiana is, we have crossing guards there, and they've requested a portable sign like this that they can roll out into that intersection and, use that to help them slow the traffic down because of all the crossings there. So this is another sign.
We're a sign-happy town.
Right. I think it works here. I'm not sure it works at Mount Sopris in Indiana because you already have a four-way stop, and then you're telling people to yield. So I'm not sure we're sending mixed messages there. So I'm not sure it works at that particular location, but at Heartstrong, where there's no crossing, I think that's a good place to try it.
Sure.
I have a suggestion.
Could you? No, thank you.
Have you guys considered, and this is something I've been thinking about for our intersection as well, but maybe raising the crosswalk, because that sort of acts like a speed bump, but it also elevates the pedestrians and the kids who are maybe riding too, to make them taller and more visible to the cars? I don't know, I don't know the cost involved with that or how feasible that is, but.
And you're right, because we have one of those on Indiana at Superior Elementary.
And it helps a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, right at the intersection, there's drainage issues. We have done raised intersections over in downtown Superior to try to elevate the pedestrians, create more visibility.
Eldorado Drive.
Yeah, Eldorado Drive, you have a couple too.
So it's easier to do it at mid-block where the road narrows. At yours, it's pretty, that could be one of the options we discussed, but drainage is always an issue with that.
One other question about Mount Sopris while we're talking about that, and forgive me if this has already been covered. Has there ever been thought to making it a four-way stop at Castle Peak and Mount Sopris?
Moving it back.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, we can chat offline then. Thanks, Alex.
Looking for someone?
Getting to the airport.
Oh, this is 55th. Go the other way. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's a lot of those.
So this is 55th Street in Boulder, and this is between Cherryvale and Arapahoe. This is a raised intersection, and just the point that was brought up just for the audience at home, you drive up to this intersection, so the sidewalks and multi-use paths here are at the same grade as the crosswalk, right? So you actually physically drive up on this. All four legs of this intersection are raised. You have to do some pretty complicated things with drainage here because the water now has to go into here, can't flow through the intersection anymore because the intersection is the high point. So it's quite of a feat of engineering with the drainage. The other thing that happens with these is you have to install these bollards because now there's no curb at the intersection, right? So you rob Peter to pay Paul a little bit here, right? So you have to introduce a whole series of new crosswalk features in here, particularly those who are visually impaired. You have to really start thinking about how they denote the crosswalk space. This particular intersection was built in 2002 for a cost of $1.1 million. So it's pretty complicated design work, and that was in 2002. So but I will tell you from studying this over 10 years that there's a high level of pedestrian yield compliance here.
Yeah.
And the speeds dropped anywhere from 5 to 7 miles an hour, depending on the time of day. So they're highly effective. And but one would maybe kind of start thinking about the cost effectiveness of it. Why I wanted to show you this is it comes up a lot. There's other factors that you introduce into here that you have to mitigate when you build these. And I won't spend a whole session on this, but the bollards are one example of that. And there are others that we could nerd out about, but they are built and they are effective. They just cost a lot of money.
Okay, our next meeting is the first Monday in June. If that works, so I'll send it out an early invite and see if that has any conflicts. Do you have any conflicts on that day?
The gondola has been approved.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.